Chloe Thorne did not even look at Alara as she walked past. She adjusted the heavy diamond strap of her $1 million silk gown. She slammed her metal spiked heel down onto the toe of Alara's worn out sneaker. Alara felt the rubber crush. The sharp point of the heel bit into her flesh. She did not cry out. She had learned 5 years ago that Chloe loved the sound of pain. Chloe turned her head just enough to show her diamond-encrusted profile. Her voice was not a whisper. "Move your feet, you pathetic little mouse," Chloe said. "My dry cleaning bill for this dress costs more than your entire life. Do not let your filth touch my silk, or I will have you fired and sued before the first song ends." Elara gripped the master tablet in her hands. Her knuckles were white and shaking. She looked at the red lines on the screen. The audio levels were already peaking in the danger zone. "The high frequency limit is in the red," Chloe Elara said. Her voice was a flat and dead line. "If you try to hit the high notes in the bridge without the digital pitch shifter, you will sound like a car crash. This broadcast is live to 40 million people. You should focus on your breathing instead of my shoes." Chloe laughed. She reached out and grabbed Elara's chin. She did not just hold it. She pinched the skin between her thumb and her long diamond nails. She twisted her hand until Alara was forced to stand on her tiptoes. A small line of blood began to crawl down Alara's jaw. "You are a tool, Alara," Chloe hissed. Her breath smelled of expensive mint and cold rot. "You are the filter that makes the world think I am a goddess. You are the shadow that writes my melodies in the middle of the night. But remember this, a goddess does not thank her tools. She uses them until they snap, and then she throws them into the trash. Now go to your cage and fix my voice, or I will have you blacklisted before the sun comes up." Chloe gave Alara a violent shove. Alara's spine slammed into a heavy steel equipment rack. The impact knocked the air out of her lungs. As she gasped for breath, Alara's mind flashed back to 4 years ago. It was the night of the Winter Gala. Alara was hiding in a cramped toilet stall in the backstage area. She had a high fever and her throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. Chloe had kicked the door open with a loud bang. Chloe did not ask if Alara needed a doctor. Chloe had dumped a bucket of ice water over Alara's head. "Wake up," Chloe had screamed. "I need a new bridge for the finale. If you do not finish it in 20 minutes, I will tell the police you stole my jewelry." Alara sat shivering on the cold tile floor. Her hands shook as she wrote the melody that would win Chloe her first platinum record. Chloe had walked onto the stage to receive a standing ovation while Alara was coughing up blood in a dark stall. Alara looked up from the floor. Chloe was already walking toward the stage lights. The roar of the crowd was a physical wave of sound. "Are you waiting for her to say please?" A deep and gravelly voice spoke from the darkness behind Alara. Alara froze. She knew the scent of expensive tobacco and cold rain. It was Julian Vance. He was the technical director of the entire Global Awards. He owned the satellites that carried the broadcast signal. He owned the studios where stars were born and destroyed. Julian stepped into the dim light. He did not look at the stage. He looked only at the red mark and the thin line of blood on Alara's chin. His jaw tightened. He reached out with a large hand and wiped the blood away with his thumb. Then he gripped Alara's shoulder with a grip that made her feel the heat of his anger. "Your talent is a masterpiece, Alara," Julian said. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in the air between them. "Why do you let a parasite wear your soul like a cheap coat?" Alara looked down at her glowing tablet. "I signed the contract, Julian," she said. "I have 5 years of my life locked in her safe. She owns my work for 1 more hour." Julian leaned over her. He placed his large hand over hers on the tablet. His skin was dark and strong against her pale fingers. "Then we make this the longest hour of her life," Julian whispered into her ear. "The world thinks she is a siren. Let us show them the monster underneath." On stage, the lights turned a dramatic shade of purple. The host shouted into his microphone. And now, for the first time, live, the voice of the century, Chloe Thorne. The music started with a heavy rhythm. It was Alara's composition. Chloe gripped the gold-plated microphone and stepped into the center of the spotlight. She looked smug. She looked like a queen. In the VIP booth, the CEO of Lumiere Cosmetics, Mr. Sterling, held a gold pen. A $50 million contract was sitting on the table in front of him. Julian moved his hand to Alara's waist. He pulled her flush against his side. The filters are running at 100%, Julian whispered. I can hear the digital system struggling to hide her tone. End it. Alara watched Chloe wink at the camera on the big screen. Chloe was mocking her. Alara remembered the time Chloe had poured hot coffee over her hands because a vocal take was too soft. She still had a faint scar on her left wrist from that day. She remembered the night she had slept on the cold studio floor while Chloe was at party. She called me a tool, Alara said. Her eyes turned as cold as a frozen lake. Then show her what happens when the machine stops working, Julian replied. He moved his hand to the master bypass switch on the audio console. Alara watched Chloe take a deep breath. Chloe reached the bridge of the song. This was the moment of the famous high note. Alara smiled, a cold and predatory smile. Kill the filters, she said. Give them the raw truth. Julian slammed the switch down. The digital mask vanished in a microsecond. Chloe opened her mouth for the high note. The sound that came out was not music. It was a dry and cracking screech. It sounded like a heavy metal shovel dragging across cold concrete. It was sharp and flat and horrific. In the front row, a famous music critic covered his ears with both hands. Mr. Sterling in the VIP booth dropped his gold pen. The pen hit the floor and shattered into 3 pieces. The black ink began to bleed into the white carpet. Chloe froze on stage. Her eyes went wide with shock. She tried to sing louder to compensate. She pushed her voice until the veins in her neck stood out. The sound got even worse. It was a raw and talentless braying sound. It was the sound of a fake being stripped naked in high-definition video for 40 million people to see. Technical glitch, Chloe hissed into the microphone. She turned toward the wings with a face full of hot rage. She thought her microphone was off, but Julian had redirected the stage talk feed directly to the global broadcast. Alara, you stupid bitch, Chloe screamed. Fix the audio. Move your useless hands and fix it right now. The silence in the stadium was deafening. Every person in the room and every person watching at home had just heard the Golden Girl call her assistant a bitch in the middle of a live performance. Chloe realized the microphone was still live. Her face turned a sickly shade of green. She forced a trembling laugh and looked at the camera. Oh, my apologies, Chloe said to the lens. My assistant has had a mental breakdown. She is sabotaging my career because she is unstable. Security, get her out of here. Julian stepped out from the shadows of the wings. He held Alara by the hand. He walked slowly across the stage. The system is perfect, Chloe, Julian said. His voice was amplified by every speaker in the building. We just decided to turn off the lies. Chloe looked at the audience and then back at Julian. Her eyes were wide and white with terror. She ran to the edge of the stage and reached out her trembling hands toward the VIP booth. Mr. Sterling, please, she screamed. Her voice was thin and cracked like dry wood. This is a technical setup by my jealous assistant. I wrote every single song. I am the genius here. I will sign the contract for 30 million. Just tell the cameras it was a mistake with the signal. Mr. Sterling did not leave his booth. He stood up and took a wireless microphone from a nearby assistant. He walked down the private stairs and stepped onto the stage. He did not look at Chloe. He walked straight to Alara. He took the gold pen from his pocket and held it out to her. I have spent 10 years looking for the person who created the sound of my brand, Mr. Sterling said. His voice was loud and firm, and it filled the entire room. I thought it was Chloe, but a real goddess does not need a digital filter to hide her voice. Mr. Sterling looked at the $50 million contract in his hand. He took a black marker and crossed out Chloe's name with a loud, scraping sound. He wrote Alara's name in large and bold letters. The Lumiere brand represents excellence, he said. You are the excellence. If you sign this right now, the money and the global tour and every marketing resource we own belong to you. Chloe is finished. I do not just want to end her contract. I want to sue her for every cent she ever took under false pretenses. Chloe let out a sound like a wounded animal. She lunged forward and tried to grab the contract from Mr. Sterling's hand. Her long diamond nails scratched his wrist. Security, she shrieked. Arrest this man. He is stealing my business. Two security guards stepped from the shadows and grabbed Chloe by her upper arms. Their fingers dug hard into her white silk sleeves. You are trespassing on this stage, Miss Thorne, the head of security said. Your credentials have been revoked by the technical director. Julian stepped closer to Alara and placed his arm around her waist. He pulled her flush against his side so everyone could see she was under his protection. He looked at the giant screen behind them. He swiped his thumb across his wrist device. The screen did not show the awards logo anymore. It showed a video from a security camera in a recording studio from 2 years ago.
The video showed Chloe standing over Alara. Alara was sitting at a desk with her head in her hands. Chloe picked up a cup of steaming hot coffee and poured it directly over Alara's hands. You do not get to rest until the chorus is perfect. Chloe's voice came through the speakers. I do not care if your fingers are burned. You are a tool. Tools do not have feeling.
The audience let out a massive roar of disgust. In the back of the stage, the 4 backup singers who had stood behind Chloe for years stepped forward. They dropped their microphones on the floor. The sound of the metal hitting the stage echoed like gunshots. We are done, the lead backup singer said. She looked directly at the camera. We have watched her abuse Alara for 5 years. We were afraid of the Thorne lawyers, but we are not afraid anymore. Chloe did not even know our names. She called us the singing furniture. Chloe began to shake. She reached up and grabbed her own hair. She pulled at the blonde curls until her scalp turned red. She scratched at her own silk dress until the fabric ripped. It is all a lie, she screamed. She looked at the audience. You loved me. I am the one you paid to see. Julian tapped his device again. The screen showed a series of bank transfers. It showed Chloe taking 90% of every royalty check while Alara lived in a small basement apartment. It showed the medical bills that Chloe had refused to pay for Alara's mother unless Alara signed away her legal rights. Julian looked at Chloe struggling in the arms of the guards. You used her blood and her pain to build your palace, Julian said. His voice was a cold and heavy weight. But you forgot that a tool can also be a weapon. Tonight, the weapon has found its mark. Chloe's father, Arthur Thorne, stepped onto the stage. He was a man of power and ice. He looked at his daughter with a look of pure shame. He did not say he loved her. He did not try to help her. I have already instructed my legal team to remove your name from every Thorne Group asset, Arthur said. His voice was amplified by the House speakers. You have crashed the company's stock by 20% in 10 minutes. You've embarrassed our name for the last time. Do not bother coming to the House. The locks have been changed. Your trust fund is gone. Dad, please, Chloe begged. She tried to fall to her knees, but the guards held her up. Arthur Thorne turned to a man in a black suit standing in the wings. This was his head lawyer. Mark, finish the paperwork, Arthur commanded. The lawyer stepped forward with a digital tablet. Every song copyright under the Thorne Group that was credited to Chloe Thorne is being legally transferred to Alara Vance today, the lawyer announced. This includes all future royalties and all past earnings held in escrow. Chloe Thorne has 0 assets. She is officially in debt to this company for $100 million in damages. Chloe let out a scream that did not sound human. She lunged at the lawyer, but her heels caught in the hem of her dress. She fell forward and her face hit the stage floor with a loud thud. Her tiara snapped in half and rolled into the orchestra pit. Julian did not even look down at her. He turned to Alara. He took her hand and raised it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles in front of 40 million people. The stage is yours, Alara, Julian said. Ilara walked to the grand piano in the center of the stage. She sat down. She did not look at Chloe. She did not look at the cameras. She began to play. The music was pure and honest. Every note she sang broke a piece of the silence that had trapped her for 5 years. The audience stood up and cheered until the walls of the opera house shook with the sound of her victory. Chloe tried to stand up. She tried to scream over the music, but no one was listening to her anymore. The stage lights for her were turned off. She was standing in the dark. The guards grabbed her again and dragged her toward the stage door. They did not care that her dress was torn and covered in dust. They threw Chloe out of the heavy metal doors and into the back alley. Chloe landed on the wet pavement. The rain was falling in heavy and cold sheets. Her white silk gown was instantly soaked with gray mud and oily water. She looked up at the door, but it was locked from the inside. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a message from her personal assistant, Sarah. I watched the show from the office, the message said. I have already sent your private browsing history and your tax evasion files to the reporters. I hope you enjoy the prison food. You told me I was lucky to even breathe your air. Now you can breathe the air in a cell. Another message appeared from her bank. Your accounts have been frozen by court order. Your remaining balance is 0. Chloe looked at her phone screen. The battery died and the screen went black. She was alone in the dark. She was broke. She was humiliated. A black limousine pulled out of the garage and stopped in the alley. The window rolled down halfway. Ilara sat inside the warm and dry car. She was wrapped in Julian's heavy cashmere coat. Julian sat next to her with his arm around her. He was holding a glass of champagne and looking at Ilara with a look of pure adoration. Ilara looked at Chloe through the window. She did not say a word. She did not smile. She looked at Chloe like she was a piece of trash on the side of a highway. Ilara simply reached up and rolled the window back up. The limousine sped away into the night. The heavy tires splashed a massive wave of dirty and cold rainwater directly into Chloe's face. The water was filled with the grime of the city. The paparazzi found Chloe a few seconds later. 100 cameras began to flash at once. The light was blinding and cruel. They caught her on her knees in the mud. They caught her crying in the dirt. She was a ghost in the rain. And from every speaker in every car passing by, the voice of Ilara was singing a song of power. The world finally knew the truth.
Watching Chloe Thorne crawl in the mud after losing $100 million isn't just a career failure. It is the sound of a parasite finally starving to death in 4K resolution. If you were in Ilara's shoes, would you have tolerated 5 years of abuse for the sake of the music? Or would you have exposed the fraud the very moment that hot coffee touched your hands? Between us, I wrote that final scene where the limousine splashes her face specifically to mirror the exact rhythm of her father's heartbeat when he officially cut her off.